Floor fighting is dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is that it seldom ever occurs the way that we train for it to occur. Now there's three different ways you can end up on the ground. One is the one-on-one situation. This is what most of us train for. From that, there's two ways. One is you take him down. That's what we hope is going to happen. The other way is he takes you down. The second way you can end up on the floor is you and your partner take somebody else down.
Ready? Now.
The third option is you, him, and a few of his buddies. And if you think you're going to be rolling around on the ground while they're not doing anything, good luck. They're going to throw in their 2 cents and their size 10s. Now this last option should scare the bejeebers out of you. Somebody once said that unless the guy thinks he can get away with it, he is not going to try it. This is a good thing to remember. Most cases, the guy's going to try something, but he's going to have backup with him. Guys are going to be there just like, yeah, we'll help you, buddy. And that's where he gets his courage. 90% of judo, jiu-jitsu, and aikido are predicated on fighting on a one-on-one situation. And they're good for it. I make no disrespect towards these arts. But it's very seldom that you're going to be in a one-on-one situation. If you try a lot of these techniques, you're going to get your head split open with a beer bottle. There are some floor stylists who claim to have multiple opponent techniques, and maybe they do. But let me tell you, when I was 16, I saw a guy at a party stomped by about 10 guys, and they surrounded him and they were just stomping him down. And when they finally dragged him up to get him out of there, somebody looked at him and said, hey, he can still walk, let's break his legs. They did. This is why experienced street fighters hate going to the ground. They know this is where stompings occur. So maybe there's a martial arts master out there that has a secret technique that he can do. Let me tell you flat out, that's him. That's not you, that's not me. So what we have to do is deal with what you can do when you're on the ground right now, because that's where you're going to be in danger. Animals important safety tip number 1. Going to the ground against multiple opponents is not something you want to do. Now this is not to say that all those neat judo, jiu-jitsu throws that you've learned are useless. Far from it. Take the guy down. Maybe if you want, throw him into his buddies. That works. The thing is, don't follow him to the ground.
In my book, Floor Fighting, I said that there are 3 ways to end up on the ground. The first way is slipping. It could be ice, mud, spilled beer, or whatever. You just lose your footing. It happens in real fights. You can do lots to counter this by really learning balance and footwork, and most importantly, keeping your knees bent. Number 2, you get thrown or taken down. This obviously means you're messing with the wrong person and or you weren't paying attention to what your opponent was really doing when he grabbed you there. Free safety tip here. Somebody grabbing your arm is an attack. Counterattack. Not him, but his hand. Get that hand off you now. The third way is the most common, however, and that's basically you get tackled. I've seen a lot of inexperienced fighters start fights this way. The first thing they do is plow into the guy. Obviously, this is the favorite move of expert grapplers too, so you never know when you're going to run into it. Let me point out that the third way happens a lot. Unlike sparring, where 2 guys are fighting at a distance, in real fights, the combatants close immediately and they try and overwhelm each other. A lot of times what happens is that one combatant will overwhelm the other and immediately press his advantage. However, just as often what's going to happen is that the 2 guys are going to close, they're going to clinch, and both fall over. I'd like to add a 4th way that you can end up on the ground, and that is you're doing a takedown on somebody and he grabs onto you. This happens. This is one of the main differences between the martial arts and reality. In reality, you start taking the guy over, he's going to be flailing around, he's going to reach over and grab whatever's around, and that's you. So a martial artist, however, is trained to cooperate with you. He knows what's going to happen, he's not going to do this flail, so he'll cooperate with the move when you take him down. See? That is working with a training partner. This is why anytime you do some sort of takedown, you have to keep your guard up because that guy will flail. It's a human reaction for him to flail and grab. The other alternative on ending up on the ground in this situation is really ugly, and that is you've muckled onto a trained fighter. This is the guy who has intentionally grabbed onto you. Going to the ground with a trained fighter is not a pleasant experience. Tim and I once had a slight misunderstanding where we went down to the ground. We thought we were somebody else. On the way down to the ground, he had his arm across my throat. I had my elbow up, so when he landed on me, it wouldn't crush my throat. He's grabbing the back of my head, trying to pull it down, so I hit on the concrete. I'm trying to tuck up, headbutt him, and on top of that, he's trying to knee me in the cojones. I'm, in the meantime, blocking it. It was an ugly situation. That's what's going down to the ground with a trained fighter is like. I want to introduce you to two fundamental principles right now. Number one is gravity works. Gravity is a force that is always working on you. It's always working all the time. It doesn't take breaks when it's convenient or inconvenient for you. It's an ongoing process. The important thing to realize is it's not only working on you, but it's also working on your opponent. Now, gravity is a force that's pulling down, and our legs are a force that are always pulling up. Now, if you take away the support, gravity takes it down. The other thing, however, is if your base, that upward pressure, goes too far over, gravity will also take over. This is important to understand because it has a lot to do with why you'll end up on the ground. Now, the other principle I want to introduce you to, or the other fundamental, is that the human body moves in circles. Our joints move in circles. You can do this. Our body is designed to operate in circles. If we go in a straight line, most times what it is to get our body to the circumference of a circle. Basically, we just trace the radius. Now, I go into these concepts a little further and deeper in my video, Professional Use of Force, but I'd like to touch on it again here, is that the fact that our body moves in circles, it's easier, instead of trying to press straight in on somebody, to move his body along those natural circles. Just a little bit of force, and I can move him. Now, it also applies to his torso included. I can push him this way, and he can resist. However, I can also easier move him this way. Just a little bit of energy, I can get that much motion just by moving him along these circles. Something most people don't realize, and that you can use to your advantage and really exploit against them, is that balance is not a static state. You're not a statue, you're a gyroscope. It's an ongoing process with lots of subtle little details and corrections that we're not aware of. Most people aren't aware of how complicated walking really is. Now, here's somebody walking. How hard is it? It's not too difficult at all. But have you ever tried to consciously walk? The thing is, part of our psyche has just gone onto autopilot about walking. We just do it without even thinking about it. It's just an unconscious process. And unconscious processes are usually blind spots. Now, I want you to try something, and that is to consciously walk. Let's stand up, and instead of just launching the program, the walk program of like, okay, do it, I want you to consciously do every stage of the process. And that is, you stand up, you shift your weight, you lift your leg, take your foot out, put it down, catch yourself, shift again, lift, step. Turn around. Now just walk back normal. Launch the walk program. One of those actions is easy. You just autopilot, you just walk. When you consciously pay attention to walking, though, you realize how delicate walking is, how complicated the process is. And with any complicated process, the only thing easy about it is messing it up. If you're that unconscious about walking, how unconscious are you about balance? We automatically stay in balance because of this part of our psyche that's always running the balance program. We just assume that being in the balance is the way it is. That's not true.
People exist in what I call the cone of balance. Now the cone of balance is a cone where if we take our body outside that without counterbalancing it, we're going to fall over. Now the cone is very good a description because it gets narrower and narrower and narrower as you get further down. Now if he takes his shoulders out of the cone of balance, he goes over. However, the distance that it takes to reach the edge of the cone with his hips is slightly less. Get your hips out. The knees, even less. Until eventually, when you get to the ankles, it takes almost hardly anything to do it. Now, balance is incredibly delicate. What I was saying about gravity and our base, this is an example of it. Anytime we get outside the cone of balance, gravity takes over. So, when we walk or when we normally step, what we're doing is taking ourselves out of balance and then catching ourselves with a counter. So when he goes out of balance, he steps, catches himself. Now another point that I want to bring up is that this cone of balance also works forward. This way. So when we can bend over this way because most times we counterbalance it, looking somewhat like Ernest Borgnine. But if we don't get that counter out, he just comes forward, goes over. Understanding this cone of balance is really important because it not only applies to you, but it also applies to the other person. And if you can affect his cone of balance, you can take him down. The problem is, if he affects your cone of balance, you're going down. This cone is a whole lot smaller than we think it is. Most people get hurt going to the ground because they hit what I call the point of no return and they don't recognize it. They've hit that point where they are going down to the ground. That's it, no ands, if, or buts. But they're still trying to get up instead of preparing and bracing for impact. That's a common mistake. You'll see it over and over again. The guy doesn't know he's going down until it's way too late. If you know this cone, if you know where it is, you can begin to brace for impact a second earlier. That'll give you an extra edge to keep yourself from getting hurt. Train for this. Go out and practice throwing yourself over. Find your cone of balance. Learn what it feels like when you reach this point of no return. This is important because most people are hurt going down to the ground because they're not prepared for it. And if you know about this and you practice for it, you train for it, you become aware of this, this spells the difference between walking away from an altercation, waking up in a hospital, or not waking up at all. Animals important safety tip number 2. Knowing when you're going to the ground is your first defense against getting hurt down there. That extra second will give you time to tuck, to roll, to prepare for it so you don't get hurt when you hit. Or, once you get the hang of that, you can move on to the next stage, which is making sure that this guy hits first. Knowing how to fall is the first line of defense in ground fighting. Number 1, first rule, is protect your head. Head injuries are the most common and the most severe injuries you can sustain going to the ground. And yet, they're also the easiest to prevent. All you have to do is put your head down. Now, there's a subtle difference here between doing this and just tucking your chin. When you put your head down, what you do is that you keep your head from hitting the ground, right? Hardly any chance of him whiplashing and hitting. However, if he just tucks his chin, he's more likely to whip his head. The other thing that's important about knowing the difference between tucking your chin and putting your chin down on your chest is that if you just tuck your chin, you get a little bit of an arch, not much, but if you put your chin down, you begin to arch your back. This is critical for landing on your back and beginning to roll, because what you're going to do is curl up. Now, most throwing arts, grappling arts, do front takedowns. However, the reality of the situation is that in most fights, when somebody goes to the ground, they go down backwards. And that is why you need to curl up, you need to protect your head, because when you go over backwards, if you don't tuck or you don't curl, you don't put your head on your chest, you're going to whiplash and hit yourself on the back of the head. The next step is curling up. You've started the process by tucking your head down. But when you turn your spine into a curve, that bleeds off the energy. And the way to practice this is a really silly looking exercise, but it does work. Grab your knees and just rock back and forth. This teaches you what it feels like. If anything bumps, if anything thumps, pull it in, tuck it in. Now, one thing that makes this a little easier is be very conscious about tucking your hips in, because otherwise you'll go bam. So you rock back and forth just to get the hang of it. Now, from there, what you need to do is to start working higher and higher. Start working this way. Eventually, work your way up from where you're doing this from a squat and fall back. Now, naturally I'm going to recommend that you do this with, mats at the gym with a gymnastic instructor, etc. Take it easy on yourself. This is training. This is not abusing yourself. Eventually, when you get to this point where you can fall from here without hitting you too terribly hard, you'll be beginning to get the idea of what's necessary to survive a trip to the floor. Another really important thing to understand about falling is that you use your leg as a piston. That means when we go down, we put our legs here to slow our descent. So when we actually fall, it looks like this. Now, what we're using here is our leg kind of like one of those air pistons or air shocks on a screen door. It's not to stop us, it's just to slow us down. It's not a brace that is going to keep us upright. Once we've hit the point of no return, we're going over. We know that already. So what we do is we put the leg here and just use it to slow us slightly while we tuck and protect ourselves. The number 2 cause of injuries when people go down to the ground is that they don't get their leg mobile. They don't use it as a piston. They try and use it as a brace and they end up falling on it. And when they fall on it, they break something. The other point that's really important to understand about why you have to have the mobility in your leg is that not only is it going to slow you down, but once you're braced for impact, you're going to reapply it to make this guy's life real miserable. Now, most people, when they're faced with going over backwards, instinctively put their hands out to catch themselves. Now, while that may be an instinctive move, it's not really a good one, because when you go over, you end up landing on them. And if you land on them, you run the high risk of breaking them. The other problem that you're likely to encounter is that as you're going over backwards, you may want to put your hands down, but you're up close with the guy and you're fighting. So you don't really have your time to get your hands down there. What this technique of tucking and rolling will do is you won't have to worry about catching yourself so much because you'll have the experience rolling and rocking. Now, if you hit your point of no return, one of the things you can do to counter that is to squat. Now, this action does 2 things. Number 1 is it lessens the fall, right? You have less distance to go. Number 2 is that if you've been training doing the drills that I told you, you're more familiar with falling from this position. The real nice thing about it is, though, is that occasionally you'll be able to spin the guy off as he's doing it. You've suddenly shifted your center of gravity lower, so when he attacks, instead of going over, I can make him there. Now, even if he takes me with him, I can land on him and he lands on the bottom. There are all sorts of rolls that you can do, but if I were to try and show you all of them, it would fill up this entire video. So what I want to do is just touch on a few critical points on each of them before I move on. A side roll is a situation that you're going over sideways. What you don't want to do is land on your shoulder here. So as you're going over sideways, begin to tuck, curl up like this. And what that does is it brings your shoulder blade into play, and that's where you want to land. If you try and touch your shoulders together, you've turned your back into a ball, so you can roll this way instead of landing like this, which is a much harder landing. There's another type of fall, which is a real nasty one, and that's where you kind of land in between your head and your neck, or your head and your shoulders, and you land this way. If you've ever been bucked off a horse, you know that fall. That is easy to handle if what you do, tuck your head down, and then take your shoulder, try and touch it to your nipple. What that does is it begins you to curl up this way. So instead of hitting like this, you once again hit on your shoulder, and you hit like this. Another point is if you're laying on the ground. Laying on the ground rolling is something a lot of people don't spend much time thinking about, but the truth of the matter is, if you don't tuck things in, there's all sorts of things to hit on and catch. So as you roll, remember to tuck close. Because if you have things sticking out, it's a harder roll. Now, excuse me, naturally I'm going to recommend once again, you don't start out high, you start out low. Do it in a gym, do it with mats, do it with a professional gymnastics instructor or a judo instructor, somebody who can show you the finer points of rolling. Also, train your stupid side. We all have sides that can do something very well, very quickly. We all have sides that are a little less adept. If you're right-handed, do 20 rolls this way, practicing it that way. But do 40 rolls on your left side, because your right side will catch on a whole lot quicker than your left will. So you have to train more, you have to train your denser side more. Another point where I veer away from traditional grappling arts is in the fall. A lot of the falls show people to go down and to take the energy in what's called a break fall. They take and they slap the mat. That absorbs most of the energy. So the guy goes over backwards. What I have just done by slapping that mat is I've absorbed the energy of the fall into the ground. I personally prefer a more dynamic method where what I do, and this comes from my gymnastic training I should point out, is I utilize the energy of the fall to get myself into a preparatory position. So if I go over backwards, I roll and I get back up. This is a matter of me whipping myself into a position where I can get up. If I'm going over sideways, for example, and I'm here, if I slap the mat, I've stopped all the energy. I don't want to do that. On the other hand, if I go over this way, I can roll and come into a preparatory position where I can get up. This is largely contingent on what type of throw or how you're going down to the ground. If you're down on the ground, if you're on your back, you're rolling, you can kick in extra energy to get yourself up. I suggest that you practice with this, work on it, roll around on mats, find out where you can do it and where you can't. I have had more sanctimonious, never been in a real fight but studied some style for 20 years martial artists tell me that I'm overreacting to the danger of a longhorn tackle. Now, they say they have all these techniques that will work against somebody charging you. And yeah, that's true, they do. If the guy starts over here. You're in a situation, the guy comes out like this, boom, he gives you all sorts of time to come up with a fancy technique that'll work. And like I said, the techniques a lot of times will work. However, the reality of the situation is the guy won't be charging from over there. He'll be trying to take you down from here. Now this happens a lot of times that you're fighting, boom, and you just end up clinching. Hard to avoid. The other way that you can get rushed this way is you're there, you're beating on the guy, you're doing great, and he suddenly realizes he's losing. And what does he do? He closes on you. You both end up going down. Now, It's hard to fight a determined grappler. Somebody who is determined to tackle you, to take you down, is really difficult to resist. Look at the Ultimate Fighting Championships. Living proof right there. The way to learn this is don't work with somebody who's cooperating. But honestly, go out and have a buddy of yours who used to play football. Have him tackle you and see how easy it is to resist this. And most important safety tip number 3. Train for probabilities, not possibilities. Chris Karachi has a saying which is, train as you live, live as you train. Good advice. I would advise also that what you do is study how human beings act and behave. Watch for general patterns. See what you notice the most, what happens the most. If you train for what happens most often, you'll be able to handle most of what happens. We've covered how to minimize the damage to yourself when going to the ground. But now it's time to focus on maximizing the damage to him for the same trip. Remember how I said the human body moves in circles? It's harder for me to move him in a straight line than it is for me to move him in a circle. Now, if he is charging and closing with me, what I can do is to spin it. Now, this is not a grab throw. This is instead, when he closes with me, we spin and go down, and he lands on the bottom. Now, there's a lot of stuff that can go into that, but the main thing is to spin your body so he hits first. As you're going, all you do is spin. Now, the way to practice this is to, by your bed, stand by the side of your bed, fall over, and begin to twist. By the time you get to the point of where you can land on your side with your bed, you're probably ready to move on to the next step, which is go to a gym where they have a mat and practice as you fall over spinning. So it looks something like this, going over backwards. The main thing is to spin your body so he hits first. No matter how you land, make his landing nasty as possible. If you're coming down on top, if you've managed to do the spin that I was talking about, plant the elbow. Okay, get the knee into him. Make sure that he has that little extra to remember you by. So when you come down, slam the elbow in. Now, if you're on the other side of the coin, and you're on the downside, remember how I mentioned your leg is acting as a piston? That same action that was slowing your descent now comes up to get your knee up so he lands on it. Now, landing this way with him on top does 3 things. Now, number 1, it hurts him. He's going to land with his entire body weight on this, and it spears him. It doesn't do him any good. Number 2 is from this position, he's going to slide off an angle. He's not going to fall directly onto me. He's going to go off one way or the other. This is important. But most important, what getting this elbow up does is it prevents anything nasty along the same lines that he's got coming at you from reaching you. So, boom, I'm safe from this arm bar. If my elbow wasn't up there, his entire weight would be on my throat. Don't want that to happen. Speaking of arm bars across the throat, actually an arm bar is harder to break than a stranglehold. Strangleholds are easy. You just snake your arm over, break. Okay. Where he comes in over, he pins this arm, then with this hand, he takes them and levers me off him. Crosses me up, he can throw me down, I go all the way down. Pretty easy to do that. An arm bar across the throat, however, is a little more difficult to break because the guy's bearing his weight on you. And what you have to do with those is as the guy's bearing down, snake through, take control of his elbow here. The inside of his elbow is where you will break this. Grab the back of his head, straighten out. You got to come up. So snake through, straighten out, and then drop the elbow in. Okay? It's just real simple. You get your hand there, straighten it, drop the elbow. Pretty effective. Unfortunately, that doesn't work if you have a bigger guy on top of a little guy. what you have to do in those circumstances is, as he's bearing down with an arm bar, is do the same action, but also grab his hand here and break. So I've now crossed him up. I can take him head down. Okay? Like I said, against the bigger guy, you got to use this other hand. Against same size guy, drop your elbow in there. Just take him out. The next issue I want to address is breaking a chokehold. There are three main types of chokeholds that you can run up against. And the answer to all of them is pretty much the same thing. The starting point is you need to turtle up. That means tuck your chin in and lift your shoulders. Right? The tucking your chin in protects your trachea. The lifting your shoulders protects your carotid arteries. Now, the three types are, number one is the blood flow. Now in this one, the trachea is in the crook of the arm, and by applying pressure this way like a nutcracker, I cut the flow off to his brain. Now this is a really good technique, and it takes about 7 seconds to take somebody down this way. It is what the police chokeholds are supposed to be. This is probably the safest way to do a chokehold, but I'm not recommending you do chokeholds, by the way. I'm also saying that if you do ever learn how to do a chokehold, go learn from a professional. Also learn CPR and EMT training. But the second type of chokehold, and this can lead to physical damage if not death, is the arm bar across the throat. Unlike the first one, which cuts off the blood, this cuts off the airflow. This takes a little longer. The guy's more likely to fight. And what also happens with this is that you do it, the trachea is very likely to swell and or collapse, and the person will choke to death. This is why the chokehold is such a controversial move, is if the guy's fighting too hard, you can be trying to get a blood chokehold and the guy will fight, and you'll end up putting a forearm chokehold on him, and that cuts him off. You put him in a drunk tank, swells, he dies, you have a suit on your hand. The third type of chokehold is much more brutal, and that is a combination of both with the added twist of it's basically designed to snap the guy's neck. The counter to all of these chokeholds is, as I said, you turtle up. That's the start. But the wonder cure of them all is simply putting your hand to your face. What that does is it protects you against this type of closeout. It can protect you this way, and naturally, with your hand up there, you can push back and keep him from getting the leverage he needs to snap your neck. To get out of a chokehold, your main trick is to simply get the guy's arm off your neck. The best way to do that is via his hand. So if he's up here, what you do is just reach up, grab his thumb, and peel straight down. Simple peeling action, just takes the hand right off. Something you should also know is if you're laying on your stomach, it is most likely that an untrained fighter who is, if he's not a professional and he's trying to cuff you or something like that, an untrained fighter, don't worry, will try and choke you out. He'll try and come up this way. That's something you have to watch for, you have to be very careful of. That's why turtling up will help you. Now, a point that I veer away from traditional grappling attitudes with is when it comes to being on the ground with a guy, I believe in getting away. I don't want to stay down there with the guy. That, staying on the ground with the guy while his buddies are around, leads to them just kicking your kidneys into guacamole. I don't like that. Now, one point that a lot of grapplers come from is what's called the ready position, and that's this. From this position, by grabbing my head and pulling me down, he keeps me from rearing up and popping it. Makes a lot of good sense. I agree with that. Generally speaking, though, what you want to do is keep the guy from getting up on top of you. And to do this, you do it by a thing called bridging. You take his back leg, goes out like that, creates kind of a kickstand. That keeps him from getting rolled over. Also, this knee comes down, keeps him from getting kneed in the cojones. Very handy thing to have. This bridging will keep you from getting the guy rolling on top of you. The next thing I want to cover is if the guy does get on top of you. There's a thing, it's kind of a strange term, but they also use bridging in another manner. And what that is that you actually arch up and lift the guy off you. This is accomplished by getting your feet up underneath you and then arcing your body up. So that's where the term bridging comes from. It's a sudden, harsh jerk, and you throw the guy forward. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. One is you grab him, grab one of his arms, pull it and bridge, and he falls off to the angle. And the other one is a much more harsh manner. So the first type of bridging is that he's on me like this, and I control one hand, pull him this way, bridge up, and throw him off me. Okay, back up. The other type of bridging is you grab both of his hands, and I'm not going to do it fast because it will really hurt him, but you grab both of his hands like this and peel them down when you bridge. Obviously, he's got no way to catch himself as he goes face first. Now, this bridging action is something that you need to exercise. You need to go out and go to the gym and work on. Because if you don't, you're going to throw him forward, and all that's going to happen is he'll slide forward up here. And in that situation, you're left with the choice of, well, the only way to get him off is to bite him in the crotch. And I don't think we want to go there. So it's your call as to which is worse, exercise or. You don't want to stay on the ground with the guy rolling around because his friends will start doing a polka on your face. The best thing to do to keep yourself from getting hurt is to stop him from punching you, number one. And that can be achieved by simply placing your hand on the inside of his upper arm. So he can try and punch, but you got him pretty well jammed. The problem with that, though, is that if you push him away, it's not going to do much good. The better way to push him away is from his shoulder. You just shove. He'll roll away. Use that energy from your shove to roll you this way, too. Now, if you have him cut here, if he's really trying to pop you, you can use this hand to catch his shoulder and get him going, too. That'll work. An easier way, though, is if he's trying to attack you from with this hand, you take your hand, slide it up to his shoulder, and just roll him over. And again, the same action you use to push him away, you're using to get yourself out of there. Animals important safety tip number 4. The best way to keep from getting hurt is to affect his ability to hurt you. Now this may sound really obvious, but it goes a whole lot deeper than most people think it is. He can be sitting there throwing punches, and I'll block his punches all day long. And I do nothing to keep him from throwing further punches. However, if I somehow affect his ability to throw a punch at me or to throw a kick at me, I am safer than if I spend all my time blocking. I don't want to waste my time blocking. I want to instead get inside and do something that will keep him from being able to hurt me. Whether that means checking his arm, whether it means spinning him away, or making sure that he hits first and I skewer him on the way down and he's so much in pain that he can't fight. The idea is to affect his ability to hurt you. Until now, we've been mostly defensive in what we've been working with. However, I also want to point out that on the floor, you can be offensive too. The problem is that when you're down here, you don't really have much punching power because you can't get your body weight behind it. So you can get a punch, but you won't be doing much good. From here, however, what you can do is deliver what I call the slap blocks, which are pretty hard, impact, and most of it comes from here. I've gone into these elsewhere, other tapes, it was in my knife videos. You can pick that up, learn how to deliver them. It's a really effective, hard strike. You can do a lot of energy in that. The other thing that is really good is elbows. Elbows, you have to commit a little more body weight, but you can drop in a lot of power there. Punches aren't really good, but that and that work. Now, what would make these most effective is if you work on the vital targeting. You hit certain areas and you can cause major pain with these. An elbow shot to behind the jaw right here underneath the ear causes a major shock. It's a very painful area. You can take and gouge your finger in there and you'll find out how much it hurts. An impact there is very painful. Upward elbow is a very powerful strike on the ground. You can bring that up, bring it into the guy's solar plexus. A side elbow into his short ribs takes the guy's air away. These motions, a slap block right here onto his face, take his nose. These motions carry a lot more clout in the limited area that you have to strike with. There's a wide variety of nasty things you can do if you know how the human body is put together. Gouges with the knuckles, the thumb, in the ears, all the pain control spots. You do an eye gouge, you stick your finger in the guy's eye, odds are he'll begin to break away. When you do these moves, understand it's to get him away, to cause pain so you can escape. The other really good technique for this sort of situation is the headbutt. Now a headbutt on the ground is a little different than a headbutt on your feet. What you're doing is that you are still using your body weight to get your impact with, but it's sort of slowed down, so a lot more work has to be done with the neck. Now be very careful about doing these things, and I highly recommend that you practice it. Get some sort of pad, etc., and be very careful, work slow, work your way up. But the first thing you do is you start your body moving forward, cock your head back a little, and as you move your body forward, snap your head a little forward. Best place to aim is not to his forehead, but rather to the lower side of his face. If you hit it right, you'll cause major breakage across his nose, etc. It's a real simple move, but like I said, you have to practice it. Give me a little more brace here. Now, that could be enough of an impact to stun him so you can get away. Another important thing to know about getting away from the guy is that you get to use your legs too. You can use your hands to roll the guy or start rolling him, but by using your legs you can get that extra oomph. Now, I was referring to when you're down on the ground, keeping your knee down here to protect yourself. Well, it can also be used as an offensive weapon. However, if once you've headbutted the guy, he's stunned, you put your hand in the position I told you, put your feet here, you can then use it to kick off. Not only are you more likely to send him flying by using your legs than just your hands, but you can also get yourself moving up and away faster. There's two main floor fighting positions that you can assume. The first one is the more traditional down like this. That's a good position. It's very handy for a variety of reasons. What it does is it keeps my opponent away from me. I can make his life real miserable. And also, for the moment that you have just hit the floor, it's really good because when you hit the floor and come down and he comes down to follow you, boom, you can catch his attention, keep him away from you. The problem inherent with this stance is that it isn't good against multiple attackers. Say I'm laying here and I'm taking care of him, I'm vulnerable, boom, to an attack from the side. However, for the second that you hit the floor, it's really good, especially if his backup is beginning to deploy. From this position, however, your next shift is this. Now this looks kind of strange, and the first time I saw it I thought, well, that's kind of mets. This technique here, I can keep him away, and I can give his knees, I can give his ankles, I can give his groin all sorts of grief. What's really good about this position, however, is from here I can also deal better with multiple attackers because my hands are up. I'm protected, boom, I've covered my vital areas. Another advantage of this position is that unlike this, where I'm only kicking off my bottom leg, if I need to get away, which I do, say there's a table behind me, from this I can use both feet and my arms to scuttle away. So I can
much quicker. So learn these two positions. They're really important. Know when to shift from this to this. Now we come to another important issue, and that's getting up. How we get up has a lot to do with whether or not somebody turns our kidneys into guacamole. Most people, when they've gone down to the ground, get up the way that they normally do, which is the hands and knees. This is not a good position. The individual thinks, well, I'll just, kind of lever myself up. No. Number one, it ties up both your hands and your knees and leaves you open for attacks this way. If you're trying to get up, it's real easy to do that. It is also, unfortunately, real easy for somebody just to push you down this way. Makes it much too complicated. What you need in order to have a good preparatory position is a situation, and it can change, but the requirements are, it leaves your hands open. This way you can fend off any incoming attacks, and at least puts you in a position where you can get one foot underneath you and lever up. So from here, he can still defend himself, but he can get up forward, or down here. He can go back. Now the other preparatory positions can be something as simple as you're down, you come up, you put a foot directly underneath you. Doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you get a foot that you can rock it up on. Okay, that's important. And also notice that my hands are always free, so I'm not using my hands to get myself up. I'm using my legs. That is what you need to do. Rock yourself up into an upright position. Animals important safety tip number 5. A good goal to have is to get up as fast as you went down. When you go to the ground, especially in a room full of people, your goal changes. Forget tearing the guy up. Now it's time to focus on getting back up to your feet, getting off the ground as fast as you can. Especially in a situation where there's alcohol involved. Because a room full of drunks are really fickle. You never know whose teeth they'll decide to kick in. Let's talk about the worst case scenario. That means you're down on the ground, you're surrounded by guys, and they're kicking you. You aren't in a position where you can crab out underneath the table or get away. You're just there and you're stuck. Now, this is not a good situation because no matter which way you turn, you're exposed to somebody. He's kicking me here, he's kicking me here, I roll over to fence, and it's reversed. Doesn't do me any good. Now, a lot of people from this situation try and get out by literally just tackling the guy. What they try and do is rear up and tackle him. All the guy's got to do is step back. Makes it difficult. Even if I do grab a hold of him, all I'm doing is pulling down on him. Remember his stance, gravity, and all that? He's pushing up, so that's not good. If I even push him, though, all he does is step back, braces, reestablishes his cone of balance. Doesn't do me any good. Now, here's something that's kind of counterinstinctive. Most people, when they're down on the ground, say, cover the cojones, cover the ribs, cover it, etc., etc. No. Cover your head. Most important thing to protect is your head. The way to take somebody out from this situation, or the way to escape from this, is that you have to take somebody out, create a hole, and rabbit through it. So if I'm down on the ground, who am I going to take out? I'm going to take out the guy who's attacking my head. He's closer. Why don't you get in position? So, for safety's sake, we're not going to do this all the way, but what you want to do is, as he's kicking to the head, catch. Once you have him caught, you have him trapped, begin to roll. As you roll, you take him over backwards. Now let me point something out to you. There's no good way to fall from this position. This is going to be a hard hit. There's a very good chance this guy's going to hit, crack his head. This could be a lethal move. So before you do it, before you even consider doing it, you make sure that your life is in danger, because you will be up on potential murder charges on this one. That's a nasty truth. Multiple guys on the ground. Depends on what state you're in as to whether or not they say, well, they weren't trying to kill him. But you will be facing charges if you take somebody down hard this way. There are a lot of things that I could have covered in this video, but
most of what people teach on the subject of floor fighting is techniques. What I wanted to cover were certain fundamentals that apply anywhere, anytime. If you learn these fundamental principles, you can apply them any situation you find yourself in. Remember, train for what is most likely to happen. That way, whatever comes your way, you'll be able to handle it. And if it isn't something that you've trained for, well, with the fundamentals under your belt, with a good solid understanding, you'll be able to wing it. If you train to handle what happens most often, you'll be able to handle what happens before you do it. Before you even consider doing it, you make sure that your life is in danger, because you will be up on potential murder charges on this one. I veer from potential